Recently, we did a video detailing the failings and shortcomings of the Jedi Order around the time of the Clone Wars, and how that impacted their stay in the galaxy at large. Since we were pretty harsh to them in that video, I thought we'd turn the clock back to a time when they weren't all politics. When viewing a timeline of Star Wars, it would seem as though the Jedi had been around forever, always watching and protecting the galaxy, but like everything else, they too had their beginnings and their dawn. So grab a snack and stick with us today, as we'll tell you the story of the ancient Jedi Order. Our story begins a very long time ago, in the year 36,453 BBY. The Tho-Yor 8 Great Pyramid ships that were scattered across the galaxy began to call out to inhabitants of planets that they were located on, including Ando Prime, Kashyyyk, Manaan, Ryloth, and Dathomir. Through the Force, the Tho-Yor convinced the Force-sensitive sentients around them to board their starships, and the pyramid ships then departed the planets upon which they had sat for so long, and set out into the deep galaxy. The Tho-Yor ships then traversed the galaxy, gathering Force sensitives of many cultures and species, so that by the time that the 8 ships joined and journeyed into the deep core together, the 8th Tho-Yor traveled into the deep core to the planet known as Tython, with all manner of Force sensitives aboard their ships, all trusting the mysterious pyramid-shaped starcrafts. Upon arriving to the planet of Tython, there was a 9th, far larger Tho-Yor that awaited them as it floated above a pinnacle of stone. The arrival of the Tho-Yor was heralded by an immense force storm that swept over the entire planet, and the 8 ships gathered around the 9th largest before scattering across the planet in an event that would become known as the First Migration. In fact, the first dating system before BBY was TYA, which meant Tho-Yor Arrival. This event saw each ship deposit their passengers at the final destination and remain there, with some of these ships burying themselves in the landscape while others remained floating in the sky. The Force-sensitive pilgrims immediately realized that Tython was uniquely strong in the Force, and the pilgrims, known collectively as the Tythons, soon realized that they had been brought to Tython in order to study the Force, and learn to control and master the abilities it granted them. However, Tython's beauty came with dangers, and the pilgrims' lives became a constant form of moving meditation on the Force, truly learning from it and living through it. Rather than sitting in silent meditation, the pilgrims also realized that Tython itself reflected violence with Force storms, and quakes to imbalance between the light and the dark side of the Force, and the staunch binary between the two. The Tythons named each of these respective sides Ashla and Bogan, after Tython's 2 moons, the bright satellite celestial being Ashla and the dark moon of Bogan. The pilgrims therefore formed the Jedi Order and took their name of language of the Dai Bendu monks and the Talid species, combining the words Je, meaning mystic, and Dai, meaning center. The philosophy of balance became essential to survival on Tython, as harmony and balance between Ashla and Bogan maintained the peaceful beauty of Tython and prevented the chaos and destruction that came with imbalance. Over the next 1,000 years, the Jedi built the Jedi temples, cities, and centers of learning and healing that each centered around one of the Tho-Yor. Early in the Jedi Order's history, the Order established their 9 Jedi temples around the 9 Tho-Yor across the planet, with each ship holding great significance and a place of holy worship. While other cities and settlements were later built on the planet, the 9 temples were home to most of the planet's inhabitants and were the seats of the Order's presence upon Tython. Akar-Kesh, the Temple of Balance, was considered to be the most sacred of all, and it was built within the great pinnacle of stone above which the largest Tho-Yor hovered. The Temple of Science, Anil-Kesh, straddled the planetary rift known as the chasm near its floating Tho-Yor, and its inhabitants meddled in science and alchemy. The Temple of Healing, Mahara-Kesh, was located in the deep ocean, and the Temple of the Arts, Bodhi, was located on the plains of the continent of Masara. Back in this day, the Jedi practiced the Force freely, experiencing both sides in perfect harmony. There was very little restriction placed on the exploration of the dark side, or at the time known as Bogan, so long as students explored it in moderation. In Jedi philosophy, they acknowledged the fact that there was always light within darkness, and darkness within light, therefore meaning that it was impossible for one to ever be truly free of the other. Unlike the later Jedi Order, the Jedi were encouraged to give in to the temptations of both the light as well as the dark, as they believed it was necessary to embrace both in order to learn more about the Force. The Jedi viewed living on Tython as a near constant meditation state and study of the Force, and the Great Journey was intended to oppose young Jedi journeyers to the various disciplines and arts that were studied at each temple. Even their code at the time reflected this. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no fear, there is power. I am the heart of the Force. I am the revealing fire of light. I am the mystery of darkness, in balance with chaos as well as harmony, immortal in the Force. Since they believed that all aspects of the Force were a part of one living force, they actually did indulge in alchemy. Long before this practice was purely corrupted by the dark side into Sith alchemy, the Jedi had students that would specialize in alchemy, and from this came their signature weapons of the era. Before the lightsabers, they had regular Durasteel swords. But of course, these swords were anything but normal. Using alchemy, they forged these steel swords to be imbued with the Force itself. Once the blade had been forged, an initiate would place a crystal into the hilt of the blade, and then would marry the lattices of the crystal and the blade together. This was accomplished by submerging oneself deep into a trance granted by the Force, and then meditating on the blade and crystal until blade, crystal, and smith became as one. Once the lattices were married, the wielder would channel energy through the crystal and into the blade until it began to glow with a nimbus of energy, signifying that the blade had been permanently infused with the Force. It is unclear whether the crystal they used in this way were kyber crystals that we know and are familiar with now in Star Wars lore, but suffice it to say, if it could channel the Force, it was most likely a kyber crystal. Now though, what did the Jedi Order actually do with all of this information that they managed to garner? Much like the modern Jedi, they did travel off-world to help systems in need. The predecessors of the Jedi Knight was the Jedi Ranger. Rangers were deployed by the Jedi Council and across Tython's system, fulfilling assignments and missions requested by the Council or the other settled worlds. Rangers wore a badge known as the Ranger Star to signify their rank, and they were given their choice of starship, either a Hunter-class starfighter or the larger Peacemaker-class cruiser. Rangers were tasked with the missions of diplomacy, tracking fugitives, ending conflicts, and a wide variety of other missions, and some Rangers rarely returned to Tython. If a Jedi Ranger had shown sufficient experience, wisdom, and understanding of the Force, they might be promoted to the rank of Jedi Master, which was the highest rank a Jedi could achieve other than a Temple Master. Despite the services the Order provided to other nearby settled worlds, the existence of the Jedi in their isolation world of Tython became a thing of legend. It wasn't until the reign of Queen Hydia of Shikakwa that a full-blown conflict erupted between the Order and non-Force sensitives that shared the star system. In a system-wide conflict known as the Despot War, Queen Hydia led her army against Tython in a series of campaigns in 25,805 BBY. Despite massive casualties on both sides, the Jedi Order was able to vanquish Hydia and her forces and return the balance to the world of Tython. While balance was indeed restored, turmoil festered on Tython just 12 years later, when the Jedi Order found the wreckage of the first ship to enter the system since the Tho-Yor brought their ancestors to the world. The ship of unknown origin crashed on Tython in the area known as the Rift, close to the temple of Anil Kresh, and the mass death sparked a force storm of proportions not seen since the arrival of the Tho-Yor. Representatives of the Order investigated the crash and encountered the sole survivor, a mysterious man named Kesh, who carried a bizarre weapon known as a Force Saber. The Force Saber was a Rakatan invention in which powerful dark side energy was channeled through laboratory-grown crystals in glowing energy blades, able to be ignited as if it was a regular lightsaber. However, because of its ties to the dark side, any Jedi were at risk of succumbing with each and every use of the Force Saber, even though a lot of them were highly intrigued by its existence, and the existence of a dark side wielder from off-world. This, though, would not be the last of them. During the Rakatan invasion of the Tython system, the Jedi Order showed signs of a great divide between those who wished to use the Force Saber and those who wished to not to. The Force Saber could be considered the catalyst of the great divide between the light and the dark side of the Force, a divide that would eventually result in the creation of the Jedi, as well as the Sith. Eventually, history would play out as we know it today, with the Jedi rebranding themselves as the Jedi, opting to root themselves entirely in the light, and going to war with the Dark Jedi during the Great Schisms. Therefore, the great and powerful Jedi Order and the origin of the Jedi, as well as the Sith, coming to an official end. In another video, we detailed the history of the Jedi Order and explained the story of the Jedi. When we left off in that story is where the Jedi had rebranded themselves into the Jedi and went fully into the study of Ashla, or as they now singularly referred to it as the light side. Today, we are going to do the opposite end of the spectrum and explore the history of the Sith Order in its earliest days. If you guys have been enjoying these longer in-depth videos, it would really help us out if you could leave a like, as well as post a comment down below what videos you would like to see featured in depth later on the channel. Now, let's begin our tale. Our story begins in 25,793 BBY, in the aftermath of the Depot War, which was a skirmish between the Mad Queen of Shakawa against the Jedi Order of Tython. Here, we follow the Jedi Master known as Dagan Lok, on a fateful day where he decided to deviate from the conventional wisdom, and descended into the chasm below the Anil Kresh Temple. Within the chasm, he and his companion were overcome by a terrible vision. Within their vision, an army of dark warriors wielding blades of frozen fire, marching across Skywalkers, a forest planet near the Tython system, led by a being with one red eye. It can be inferred that this weapon could be referencing the first lightsaber, which at the time was called a Force Saber, and was a purely dark side weapon wielded by a mysterious man named Kesh. Driven mad by the visions, Locke fell to the dark side of the Force, and was taken before the Jedi Council for questioning. Despite his passion on the matter, the Council did not believe in Locke's vision, nor did they listen to his warning, and banished him to the moon of Bogan until he renounced his vision and returned to balance within the Force. Over the next 7 years, Locke lived out his exile in solitude, carving an enormous mural of himself wielding a blade of fire, and numerous pictures of the weapon. Soon after, the forces of the Rakatan Infinite Empire invaded the Tython system. Their leader, known as Martynas, sought to reverse his species' gradual loss of control over the Force by acquiring the Infinite Gate, said to exist on the world of Tython. The Infinite Gate was an ancient network of structures developed by the Sauron Qua species of Dathomir during the pre-Republic era. What the Infinite Gate did was enabled instantaneous interstellar travel between far-flung locations and could also be used as a deadly superweapon. The Rakata and their Flesh Raider soldiers attacked Tython, but were repelled by the Jedi Order. The Infinite Empire fell back to the forest world of Skywalkers and conquered it before establishing their command post there, desperate to make another move on Tython. By the end of the first year, the Jedi had allied themselves with the forces of the Settled Worlds, placing Jedi Master Rajavari in command of the joint forces. The Order also constructed Force Sabers of their own and armed themselves with the weapons. Realizing that the vision of Locke was coming to pass, they recalled him to the Order. However, at this time, he had gone completely insane. However, they still relied on him to lead them into battle against the Rakatan Empire, as he had been the one to foresee this conflict. They were successful, and the Rakatans turned on each other and ultimately fled the Tython system. However, while the Rakatan threat was diminished, a schism grew within the Order itself between those of Dagan Locke's followers and the Jedi Council. Eventually, the two groups were defined by an ideology divided by the use of Ashla, or the light side of the Force, and the followers of the Bogan, otherwise known as the dark side, believing that Dagan Locke was their savior. Dagan Locke in many ways represents one of the first ever Dark Jedi. What makes this tale so compelling is it was a Dark Jedi that saved the Jedi Order from the Rakatan Empire, and a Dark Jedi responsible for their ability to gain such power and esteem throughout the galaxy. Both sides of the Force utilized the traditional metal swords augmented through the Force itself, as well as the Bogan Jedi fighting with Force Sabers, as the Jedi Order swore off the Force Sabers entirely. This conflict became known as the Force Wars, or also the First Great Jedi Schism. The 10-year war destroyed Tython's biosphere, rendering the planet uninhabitable. The remaining Bogan Jedi fled to the Rim, but were subsequently hunted down by the Jedi of Tython. With them destroyed, the Jedi became somewhat nomadic and occasionally revisited Tython, but eventually came to settle on the planet of Ossus, as the Jedi Order that we know and love now began to form. Following the First Great Schism, a young Jedi named Ajunta Pall began his study of the ways of the Force, and when he became a master, he began to develop deeper and deeper into the practices of alchemy, which at the time was not strictly a dark side ability. Eventually, through his studies, Master Paul discovered the secret of creating and shaping life itself. By relying more and more upon the Force, the Knights of Ajunta Paul learned of using the Force of sufficient intensity could bend life itself. With their new powers, the Knights experimented upon life forms to create new species and predators as extensions of their own will, a practice which greatly worried the Jedi Council. It was postulated that their power could even be used to end death and revive dead worlds. Fearful of this great power as they saw it could be used to great abuse, the Jedi Order deemed it an abomination of the Force and sought to erase all practice of it. The Jedi High Council barred the teachings of Paul and his followers, deeming him a pawn of the dark side. But Ajunta Paul would become so much more. Angered by what they deemed Jedi arrogance, Master Paul and his followers declared war on the Order, beginning a century-long conflict that would be known to history as the 100-Year Darkness. During this time, the rogue Jedi led by Ajunta Paul and another Jedi named Karnus Mur rebranded themselves as Dark Jedi and fought with passion against the wider order. They put their ways into practice by altering life to create horrific dark side beasts such as the Leviathan, worms, as well as beings known as Terentatax. Despite their monstrous reinforcements, it came to the point that the Dark Jedi were simply outnumbered by the normal Jedi, and during the last stages of the war, they were growing desperate. Eventually, the Dark Jedi made their last stand on the world of Korbos and were ultimately defeated, driven back by the Jedi Order. After their defeat on Korbos, the surviving Dark Jedi were rounded up by the Republic armies, stripped of their weapons and armor, and the Dark Jedi were at the mercy of the justice of the Republic. Although members of the Republic wanted public executions of the Dark Jedi, the Jedi leaders were inclined to banish the rogue Jedi into the unknown, in hopes that with time, they would see the error of their ways and return to the light. Therefore, because the Jedi High Council has spoken, it was done, and the Dark Jedi were banished. Coming out of hyperspace, the Dark Jedi were placed upon an uncharted world. Landing on the planet, they were surprised to find a red-skinned humanoid species calling themselves the Sith. This world was known as Korriban. Hakagram Grosh, the ruling king of the Sith, or the Sith Ari, was shocked at the appearance of these outsiders, but after witnessing their powers and advanced technology, the king welcomed the exiled Jedi to their world. However, this ultimately led to Grosh's downfall. The Sith Ari's shadow hand conspired with the new arrivals and betrayed his liege to the Dark Jedi, believing the Dark Jedi superior to the Sith. Using their training in the Force, the exiles amazed the Sith and elevated themselves to godlike status on Korriban, becoming the rulers of the Sith people. The most powerful of the Dark Jedi, still Ajunta Paul, became the first ever true Dark Lord of the Sith. As years passed and interbreeding occurred between the fallen Jedi and the Sith, the term Sith came to mean not only the original inhabitants of Korriban, but also the fallen Jedi Masters. The Dark Jedi greatly accelerated the cultural development of the Sith. When first encountered, the Sith were a simple tribal species that wore primitive clothing and lived in small huts. With the influence of the Dark Jedi, elaborate clothing came into use, and large temples were erected by the Sith people for their overlords, including the Valley of the Dark Lords itself, tributes to the greatest Sith that had ever lived. It was from this rise to power and integration into Sith culture that the term Dark Lord of the Sith originated as a title bestowed upon the leader of the old Sith Empire by a council of lesser Sith Lords. During the early history of the Sith Empire, the coming of the prophesied savior of the Sith Order, the Sith Ari, was foretold. The Sith Ari was a perfect being who would one day lead the Sith. According to prophecy, the Sith Ari would rise up and destroy the Sith, but in the process, make them stronger than ever. Some see this as striking a parallel to the Chosen One of the Jedi legend. It is not known exactly who became the Sith Ari, and it was widely a debated topic. The issue comes with the fact that the prophecy of the Sith Ari was not as straightforward as the prophecy of the Chosen One of the Jedi. Still though, the prophecy of the Sith Ari went like this. The Sith Ari will be free of limits. The Sith Ari will lead the Sith and destroy them. The Sith Ari will raise the Sith from the dead and make them stronger than before. The words of prophecy are vague and could mean a number of anythings and any Sith Lords throughout history. Many believe that the Sith Ari was most likely Darth Bane, seeing as he was the one to establish the rule of two, which was most assuredly the catalyst to the Sith's eventual complete rise to power. Although Bane was indeed powerful, he was not without his own limits though, and was far from perfect into his ideologies. Still though, Bane is the one that ultimately implemented the rule of two, along with destroying the previously established era of the Sith. For most though, it is accepted that Darth Sidious became the Sith Ari. Palpatine had insane power to the point where he claimed to be above the need for a lightsaber, and merely used it to mock the Jedi that he fought. Sidious did indeed lead the Sith into ultimate power, and it could be said that he did somewhat destroy them in the process, as he thought of himself as the ultimate being since the rule of two did not stop with him. All the generations of the accumulated knowledge were invested into Sidious, and finally, Sidious was the Dark Lord that raised the Sith from the dead, as the legend became reality under his rule. Darth Bane did in fact fulfill a few lines of prophecy, and did destroy the Order to remake it. But it was Sidious who raised it to be more powerful than before. What is also an interesting thought is that the Sith Ari could have once been Darth Vader. Had Vader not been limited to his suit, then he would have unleashed the power of the Chosen One, and would have simply been utterly unstoppable in his ways of the dark side. In the end though, of course, it can be hard to say who the true Sith Ari was, as it can be contradictive and convoluted. The Sith Ari prophecy is one of the most convoluted prophecies in all of Star Wars. Nonetheless, it was developed and passed down by the Sith, which originated from the Jedi Order themselves. So friends, what do you think of the history of the Sith Order? What do you think of the true Sith Ari? And who do you believe the true Sith Ari was? Comment below your thoughts, as well as tell us what other histories you would like to hear about. And as always, may the Force be with you, and have a great day.